Alf, I hate to say it, but I think that sports card shows, yes, shows, popular shows, I think it's in the decline as a whole. Let's talk through it. What's going on, sports card hobby family? It is another day. It is another sports card video to kick off the week. Today we're going to talk about shows, sports card shows. Just got a few thoughts, just gathering some information. I'm just thinking out loud here. Before I get started, huge thanks to today's video sponsor, COMC.com. 35 plus million cards in the database, baseball, football, basketball, a lot of hidden gems. I actually just bought a couple of cards on COMC. I also just shot one off to grading to PSA through COMC. So all sorts of different options. The easiest place to buy and sell cards on the internet is COMC. I've got links down below to take you there and start your journey. Speaking of PSA, if you've never used them before, take $25 off, one card minimum. I've got the SCD25 code at the shipping and billing screen. Again, links down below to take you directly to that page. Get started. SCD25 gives you $25 off your first submission, and you only got to submit one card. All right, as we've been looking at sports card shows here over the last few months, really, I know a lot of people might say, hey, we're getting to the end of the year. It's end of October. It's kind of the natural slowdown anyway. But I'm not really talking about that. I've been looking really at shows post-national. One that stands out is, of course, Culture Collision. That was one that I was planning to go to. I had a conflict. I went to the one in February. It was a good show. And the one in September, I remember kind of leading up to that show, they said they had about 60 tables to sell if anybody was interested to come to the Culture Collision show in Atlanta. And that was kind of one where you're like, oh, okay, that's interesting. 60 tables feels like a lot of tables. This is September. This is not December. You know, September is still a hot time in the sports card world. You've got football season, you got all sorts of stuff going on, baseball playoffs and whatnot. And then, of course, we had Fanatics that had the Pittsburgh Pirates Stadium show that they were going to do, that they canceled that one. And then, kind of shockingly, and they did say it was due to hurricanes, I think that might have been a small part of it, also canceled / postponed the Orlando show. We say canceled because really, they said early 2025, there's no set date. So to be postponed, you got to have like another date set up. They don't have it. So really kind of the rollout of Fanatics events, whereas I think that there was a lot of interest, and I think there was a lot of good feedback from Fanatics Festivals in New York City. Really, since then, not a lot of good news there on the Fanatics events side. Not to mention, I watched Ken Sports Card Lessons YouTube channel and podcast. He was just talking over the last really couple of weeks, he's been saying very similar things, that they have a lot of shows up there in the Northeast where he's located, kind of that New York, Connecticut area. And that's a hotbed for sports card collectors and dealers. And he was saying, really, there's just too many shows in the area to where you're starting to get a little bit too much abundance to where they're just spreading too thin. You can't get to each one. And then, of course, attendance is going to be spread between all of them. Where I am here in Raleigh, we only kind of have one or two main promoters in the area. And so we don't have 5 different card shows. So I feel like that Raleigh show, when I go to it, it's always worthwhile to go to it. And it's $5 entry fee. It's not a massive show. It's certainly grown. I remember going 5 years ago to the Raleigh card show and nobody was there. It was funny, like leading up to the pandemic, nobody was there. And it wasn't because of the pandemic. This was like 2019 before all that. So like that was kind of as things were heating up, and they could barely fill half of that place with tables. Now, very different. Now they do have quite a few tables coming in, but it's a combination. You know, they've got sports cards there, but they got comic books, they've got action figure folks, they've got kind of, vintage toys and that sort of a thing. So it's really a collectible show. Yes, there's a lot of sports card dealers there, but it is more of a collectible show. The other part that Ken was talking about here is margins are razor thin right now for cards. You know, if you're buying, selling, flipping cards, there's just not anywhere near as much money in it. He was talking about that basically like a repack buyer comes in, and if that repack buyer comes in, everyone's all excited and they're going to have a great show. Otherwise, there's just not enough collectors, which tomorrow's video is going to be about the collectors collecting side of things and how it relates to the industry right now. But there's just not enough collectors, long-term holders. There's just dealers. Really, flippers are just mini dealers. Even if they're not setting up at the show, they're still going around. They've got their case and they're trying to move cards, buy and sell into cards and that sort of a thing. But it just seems to be, from what I'm hearing and what I've seen too at the Raleigh card show when I'm there, not as many flippers as there once were. There's just not as much money to be made buying and selling single cards. Additionally, I'm seeing far less content on YouTube and really IG about flip game type stuff, flipping this for that. I mean, gosh, compared to a few years ago, it's a very, very different world from where we are. Buy this to sell, all this stuff. I mean, and I think it just speaks again to just margins are just very, very, very low. I think there's far more risk in buying and selling sports cards than there were going back years. I think this is obvious, which then leads to, okay, buy what you love and collect what you love. That's been the mantra here over the last couple of years. But the problem is I just don't think we have enough collectors in the space. And again, we'll talk about this more tomorrow in tomorrow's video. And then speaking of collectors, hobbyists, kind of long-term holders, I think everyone, including myself, I can speak to this, just being a lot more picky and getting really segmented into what I'm buying. I've got all sorts of like random things, but I'm very kind of focused in these things. For Stranger Things cards, I'm only buying kind of the blues out of 10 or 11, the blue kind of the parallels, whether it be autos or otherwise. I'm collecting Alvin Kamara cards, very specific ones though. I'm not just buying every Alvin Kamara card. Drew Brees is kind of similar, and then I've got Brady, I've got Michael Jordan, but again, it's picking my spots. It's very kind of like narrow lanes within these things. So for me, when I go to a card show, I very rarely see the stuff that I'm going to collect. So really, I'm just there to kind of window shop and hang out and talk with hobbyists, which is perfectly fine. Love that too. But I think not just myself, but a lot of people that may be doing kind of more broad overall impulse buying in sports cards have changed a little bit of the way that they're operating in the space. It just seems that way because I see it all over. People are just getting really kind of into certain 90s parallel sets, certain players, and they're staying very kind of disciplined in where they are because, again, we used to be able to just kind of, you're using your existing, you can flip your collection and get into new cards. But in a lot of cases, you might be breaking even, you might be losing a few bucks, maybe you're up on some things. But for the most part, you don't want to get rid of your current collection to get into new things because you're being very focused about what you're buying, And so then it's like, oh man, I don't want to move. I've been focused. I've curated this collection. And now what? I got to pick something. I got to move out of it to get into something else. It becomes tough. It becomes tougher. So I think all of these things lead into, a less of a focus around a sports card show that's just going to have kind of a general, kind of a broad, array of stuff. And maybe you go there to find a diamond in the rough. Like maybe, you go there, you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that they do have something that I collect. But maybe that is part of this equation. Another thing I thought was interesting that Ken had pointed out in his most recent video is that these guys are all excited that they're selling to the repack buyer at 80% of comps. But how much are they buying the cards for if they're making any money if they're selling at 80% of comps? Are they able to buy in at 50 or 60% of comps? Because that would be kind of the only way that you're making any sort of money. You're paying to be there. There's taxes. There's of course, fees and expenses to participate in this thing. So, what are you buying these cards at? And how do you get a ton of volume at 50% of comps? It just doesn't really add up. And so I guess the wonder is how many dealers are actually making money at these shows? It just kind of perplexes me. When I'm at the National and I see the volume, I see all the people, I do see money being spent. It's like, okay, but it's all relative. It also costs money to set up and to travel into the National. It's not cheap. I just wonder nowadays, love feedback from dealers. If you set up at shows often, or not even like every weekend, but you set up once a month, every couple of months at a show, are you still making money the same way that you did a couple years ago? And if you are, what does that look like? Or are you just happy kind of breaking even, going out there, hey, look, this is a fun weekend for me. I get to go out there with my son or something or daughter, and we have a fun time. I get to talk to other hobbyists because there's also a camaraderie element to shows. It's not all just about making money. That can be part of the hobby as well. As long as I guess you're kind of breaking even going out there, it's no different than if you're going fishing or you're going to go play golf. I mean, you're sure not making money going out there to fish and play golf. You're just having a good time. And so maybe that's what a lot of this is. But I do know also for a lot of people, they're out there to make money. And are people really making money at shows? Especially when you factor in the cost of travel, you've got hotels, you've got food. It's always expensive too, just food. Unless you're going to bring a ton of snacks in. If you're flying, that can be kind of tricky. If you're driving, I guess you can pack up coolers or whatever. You can kind of bring a lot of food out there to where you're not eating out every meal, fine. But man, I do know that there's well-established dealers. I know some of them that have this kind of down to a science, and they've also been around in the leaner times to where they didn't need a big boom to do well. But outside of those folks that really have been around and know how to play this game, there's got to be a lot of people that are just like, I just don't know why I keep doing this. And so I think as we move into 2025, obviously for the rest of the year, it's going to be slowish at shows because that's how it always is with holidays and that sort of thing. But I do think as we move into January, we get into 2025, I think there's going to be more shows that close up shop. And also shows that just slow down in general. Not all of them. I think there's going to always be kind of popular shows. But I just think dealers, collectors, hobbyists, they're going to have to be more picky with where are we going? Where are we going to go? And even if you're just there to buy cards and hang out with friends, that's really me. I'm going to be probably a lot more choosy heading into 2025 as to where I want to go. Who do I want to hang out with? What am I doing? Than I have been here over the last 3-4 years. I think that's kind of natural. But let me know your thoughts. Are sports card shows as a whole, are they in a decline? Do we just go through kind of like the boom of sports card shows where any average promoter could start up a sports card show and get people there? I think that those days are coming quickly to an end. I think it's just going to be like the cream rises to the top. If you're a great promoter, if you're able to put together a great show, then you'll have success. But I think others will fall by the wayside. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, my friends. Stay healthy, stay awesome, and I will talk to you again later.